You are not here by accident. Something in you brought you to these words at precisely this moment, as if your own soul had arranged the timing. And though you may not fully understand why, a part of you already knows. Carl Jung once observed that the soul does not awaken by basking in the light, but by enduring wounds. True transformation rarely occurs when life is calm. It arrives when something inside of us fractures just enough to make us turn inward. If you are in pain right now, deep, unrelenting pain, it may feel like punishment. But pain is not here to destroy you. It is a catalyst, a signal, a sharp knock on the door of consciousness that refuses to be ignored. What you are experiencing is not merely suffering. It is the opening act of a spiritual awakening. The first sign is this: the pain you carry begins to challenge the beliefs that once defined you. Those shocks to the system, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the collapse, do more than cause sorrow. They fracture your sense of certainty. Through that crack, something unexpected enters: awareness. What once felt absolute, your faith in institutions, your trust in people, your own identity, suddenly trembles. And though terrifying, this trembling is also the beginning of liberation. In history, empires have collapsed the same way lives do, suddenly without permission. Think of Rome, once convinced of its eternity, crumbling under its own weight. That collapse was devastating for those who lived it. Yet out of those ruins a new Europe was born. So too does the soul crumble in order to be rebuilt. Pain is the internal fall of your personal empire. It clears the ground for something yet unseen. At first, this collapse leaves you lost. It frightens you. The self you had built piece by piece begins to slip from your grasp. But if you look closely, you'll see that this loss is not destruction. It is purification, a stripping away of what no longer belongs. Because awakening cannot be negotiated, the soul does not ask for your permission. It simply begins. And though you may want to cling to the familiar, to force yourself back into the person you were, you will notice something subtle. The old self no longer fits. The mask grows heavy. The habits grow hollow. You feel restless inside your own life, as if you have been living in someone else's skin. That discomfort, that rupture, is not weakness. It is the reconfiguration of your consciousness. Jung called it individuation, the moment when the unconscious begins to push forward, demanding to be recognized. Others might call it rebirth. Ancient Stoics would have called it fate unfolding. Buddhists might say it is dukkha, suffering as the doorway to wisdom. Cultures across time knew this truth, that to awaken is first to be broken. So if the ground beneath you feels unstable, if your beliefs are crumbling, if the pain feels unbearable, know this: it is not the end. It is the beginning. You are not being punished. You are being called. When pain first enters your life with force, it doesn't politely knock. It storms in, shattering the furniture of your mind. The beliefs you once used as pillars suddenly crack under pressure. You may feel as if the world you built, relationships, ambitions, even your sense of self, begins to crumble stone by stone. And in that collapse, fear arises. You grasp for control, but your hands find only dust. This is one of the most frightening stages of awakening because it mimics destruction. Everything familiar begins to dissolve. What was once unquestioned, the stability of your job, the permanence of your relationships, the image you projected to others, slips into uncertainty. To the mind, this feels like catastrophe, but to the soul, it is cleansing. For only by dismantling what is false can the truth finally breathe. Think of it like a great library set aflame. At first, all you see is smoke and ruin. But later, when the fire dies, you realize the shelves were heavy with books you never truly read. words that never belonged to your story. The blaze, though merciless, made space for new words to be written. History offers echoes of this process. The Black Death in the 14th century devastated Europe, wiping out entire towns. To those who lived through it, the collapse was unbearable. Yet from the ashes of that tragedy came the Renaissance, a rebirth of art, science, and human spirit. In the same way, your inner collapse, however merciless, makes room for renewal. Still, when you are in the midst of it, you cannot see the rebirth ahead. All you feel is loss. The ground feels unstable, the air heavy, the future uncertain. You begin to ask yourself, who am I without these roles, without these identities? The fear is not only of losing the external, but of losing yourself. Yet what is truly happening is this. The soul is stripping away masks. It is demanding that you stand bare, unadorned, unprotected by illusions. And though your mind resists, your deeper self knows this collapse is necessary. For how long can you pretend to be someone you no longer are? How long can you cling to structures that suffocate rather than sustain you? The collapse is painful, yes, but it is also sacred. It is the moment the false self begins to die. And here lies the paradox. What feels like an ending is, in truth, a beginning. Just as civilizations fall only to give birth to new worlds, your inner collapse is not your death. It is the quiet preparation for your rebirth. After the collapse, something subtle but undeniable begins to stir within you. It is not a rebuilding yet, not clarity or confidence, but a raw sensitivity that was never there before. You begin to feel more deeply, sometimes unbearably so. The pain that tore down your defenses also dissolved the filters that once dulled your perception of life. Suddenly, everything reaches you more directly. Emotions, energies, even silence. What used to slip past unnoticed now lingers with weight. A passing comment can echo in your mind for hours. A look from someone you love carries volumes of truth, unspoken but undeniable. The noise of the world feels sharper, harsher, almost intolerable at times. But this discomfort is not a defect. It is evidence that your soul has been cracked open. This heightened sensitivity is the second sign of awakening. You are no longer numbed by the armor you once wore. Pain stripped it away, leaving you exposed but profoundly receptive. Where you once lived half asleep, moving through life by habit, you now find yourself alert, alive to every shade of experience. In ancient traditions, this kind of sensitivity was seen not as weakness, but as initiation. Among shamans, illness or trauma was often understood as the gateway to deeper vision. The wound was the mark of the healer, the proof that the initiate had touched the hidden dimensions of existence. To feel so acutely was not a curse but a sign of transformation. Art and literature bear witness to this too. Think of Vincent van Gogh, whose suffering seemed unbearable, yet whose sensitivity allowed him to see color and light in ways the world had never imagined. Or Frida Kahlo, who turned her own pain into art that still pierces the soul decades later. These lives remind us that sensitivity is not fragility. It is vision sharpened by suffering. At first, you may wish to dull this sensitivity, to close the gates again. The intensity can be overwhelming. But if you lean into it, something extraordinary happens. You begin to perceive what is real. The hollow gestures and empty words of others lose their power. What resonates and what doesn't becomes obvious. You feel the difference between what is alive and what merely pretends to be. Yes, the mind resists. The ego longs for the armor, but your soul gives thanks, quietly, because it knows. This openness is the path to truth. Pain did not break you. It carved you open so that something deeper could be born. And though the world may not understand, you are beginning to live on a new frequency. It is not easy. It is not painless. But it is the unmistakable sign that you are awakening. As your sensitivity sharpens, the world begins to change shape before your eyes. What once seemed flat and unquestionable suddenly reveals layers of hidden meaning. A casual conversation now feels like an exchange of energy. A glance carries truths deeper than words. Even silence becomes eloquent, sometimes heavier than speech, sometimes more comforting than touch. This new depth of perception is unsettling at first. The superficial no longer satisfies you. Small talk drains you. Environments that once felt safe now feel suffocating. People you once clung to now seem strangely distant, as though you were listening to an echo of a voice you no longer recognize. This is because pain has removed the veil. You are no longer fooled by masks. You see through them. And though this clarity may frighten you, it is also profoundly liberating. For the first time, you begin to discern what resonates with your soul and what merely distracts it. The false begins to collapse all around you. False friendships, false ambitions, false versions of yourself built out of fear or survival. And in their absence, space is created for authenticity to rise. Artists and visionaries have always walked this path. Dostoevsky, exiled to a Siberian labor camp, returned to life with a vision that burned through the illusions of society and revealed the raw depths of the human spirit. Frida Kahlo's body was broken by pain, yet her eyes captured truths that polite society dared not speak. Vincent van Gogh, tormented by suffering, painted not what the eye could see, but what the soul could feel. These were not acts of escape from pain. They were acts of transformation through pain. So too is your own awakening. You no longer walk through life anesthetized, chasing validation or drowning in distraction. You begin to feel, to see, to inhabit the world in a new way. And yes, this awareness may isolate you from others. Not everyone will understand, but your soul does not crave their understanding. It craves truth. With every false structure that crumbles, with every shallow illusion that falls away, a new horizon opens before you. You notice patterns where chaos once reigned. You sense currents of meaning beneath events that once felt random. And most importantly, you begin to understand that pain itself is not your enemy. It is your teacher, your sculptor, your guide. This is the paradox of awakening. The very wound that once made you collapse is also the crack through which light now enters. And once you begin to see with this depth, you cannot return to blindness. Your vision has changed forever. There comes a moment, quiet yet undeniable, when you realize that you are no longer the person you once were. The routines that used to define your days suddenly feel meaningless. The roles you once clung to for identity now feel like costumes you can no longer wear. Even the dreams you chased with all your strength begin to fade, as if they belong to another life entirely. This is the third great sign of awakening, the shedding of the old self. It does not happen with your permission. It is not a choice made consciously. It begins on its own, like autumn leaves falling when the season turns. One day you simply notice that what once sustained you no longer does. What once fit now constrains. The person you worked so hard to become feels like a stranger. At first, this process feels like loss. You mourn the ambitions you no longer pursue. You grieve the relationships that no longer resonate. You question who you are without the masks and roles that once gave you security. But what feels like death is, in truth, purification. The soul is not erasing you. It is unburdening you. It is stripping away everything that was never truly yours. Anthropologists speak of liminality, a state of being in between. Tribal rites of passage often placed initiates in a symbolic death, a suspension between the old life and the new. Their identities dissolved so that a truer, more mature self could be born. Jung called this the death of the persona, the mask we present to the world, so the authentic self could finally emerge. In your own journey, this shedding feels terrifying because the new self has not yet taken shape. You are left in a liminal state, untethered, undefined. The world may pressure you to return to the familiar, to reclaim the old identity, to explain yourself. But deep down, you know you cannot go back. The mask has cracked, and the weight of inauthenticity has become unbearable. History, too, mirrors this truth. When the Roman Empire collapsed, people thought it was the end of civilization itself. But what looked like destruction was also transformation. The old identity of Rome dissolved, and from its ashes new cultures and kingdoms emerged. Collapse was not only loss, it was the seedbed of renewal. So it is with you. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding what no longer belongs. You are not breaking. You are being reborn. The unfamiliarity, the emptiness, the uncertainty you feel is not a sign of failure. It is the sacred ground of transformation. And though nostalgia may whisper, reminding you of who you used to be, a quieter voice rises within. It tells you that what is leaving was never your essence. It was a shell, and what is coming is not foreign. It is home. As the old self falls away, you find yourself suspended in a strange and unfamiliar place. The routines that once gave you structure no longer make sense, yet the new path has not yet appeared. It feels as though you are walking through a fog, no map, no compass, only a quiet pull within. This state is uncomfortable. The mind panics in the face of uncertainty. It demands clarity, insists on plans, begs for solid ground. But awakening does not give you the comfort of blueprints. Instead, it teaches you to stand in the unknown and trust it. This is perhaps the most difficult lesson, to let the void be fertile ground rather than emptiness. History knows this terrain well. Before enlightenment, Siddhartha wandered as a seeker, with no guarantee he would ever find truth. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison, uncertain if he would ever walk free, let alone lead a nation. These figures remind us that transformation often requires long seasons of waiting in the dark before light appears. In your own journey, the void is not punishment. It is purification. It is the space cleared so that what is real can emerge. The ego sees absence and cries, "I am lost." The soul sees the same absence and whispers, "I am becoming." And though it feels as if you are without direction, there is a deeper compass at work, an inner guidance not of logic, but of resonance. You begin to sense what aligns with you and what does not, even if you cannot yet explain why. You learn to move step by step, not with certainty, but with faith. Society will urge you to define yourself quickly, to rebuild an identity, to fit into a box again. But true awakening requires resisting that urge. It asks you to remain undefined, to live with the mystery, to let the silence speak before the words arrive. This embrace of the unknown is not weakness, it is courage in its purest form. Because only when you stop demanding certainty can something greater than certainty, truth, finally reveal itself. Something remarkable begins to happen after you surrender to the unknown. You start noticing threads of meaning woven into your daily life. Small coincidences appear, but they no longer feel random. A line in a book echoes the very thought that weighed on your heart. A stranger speaks words you secretly needed to hear. A song drifts into your world at precisely the right moment. These are not accidents. They are synchronicities, the subtle language of the soul awakening. The version of you that lived anesthetized might have dismissed these moments as chance. But now, raw and open, you know better. You feel the pattern, the invisible order at play. Pain may have taken many things from you, but it also opened a doorway. And through that doorway, you begin to sense a new kind of guidance, silent, symbolic, but undeniable. This sensitivity extends beyond events. You begin to feel the energy of people. A smile that hides sorrow cannot fool you. You sense the weight behind the eyes. You walk into a room and know immediately if tension is thick in the air, even before a word is spoken. This awareness is not learned. It was not studied in books. It awakened the moment you broke open. And though it may unsettle you at times, this new perception is not a burden. It is a gift. It is proof that the crack in your soul where the pain entered also became the space where light poured in. You are no longer blind to the invisible. You are attuned to it. Cultures across time have recognized this awakening of perception. The Greeks spoke of the daemon, an inner spirit that guided a person's destiny. Indigenous traditions have long taught that suffering can sharpen intuition, turning wounds into vision. And Jung himself believed synchronicity was evidence of the psyche's connection to the collective whole, that our souls are never separate, but part of a larger order. Now you are beginning to experience this truth firsthand. The world no longer feels like chaos. It feels alive, responsive, intertwined with your inner journey. Every encounter, every moment seems to whisper, you are not alone. You are being guided. Once you begin to sense the invisible, you realize that life has always been speaking to you. Only now you have ears to hear it. This new language is not loud or obvious. It does not arrive as thunder from the sky. It whispers, it nudges, it reveals itself in subtle currents of feeling, in the quiet certainty that comes without reason. This is the language of intuition. Intuition does not explain itself. It simply knows. You may feel drawn to a place for no logical reason, only to discover later that something essential awaited you there. You may sense that a person cannot be trusted long before their actions confirm it. Or perhaps you feel compelled to take a leap, leave a job, end a relationship, change your path without any external proof that it will succeed. To the rational mind, this is foolish. To the awakened soul, it is obedience to a deeper truth. Throughout history, mystics and seekers trusted this silent compass. The Sufi poets wrote of the beloved's whisper, guiding them through the desert of the soul. Taoist sages described it as wu wei, the effortless knowing of when to act and when to yield. Even Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart spoke of listening beyond the noise of the world to the still voice that arises within. At first, following intuition feels dangerous. Society has trained us to cling to logic, to demand evidence. But awakening strips away the illusions that evidence can always provide certainty. You begin to understand that reason has its place, but it cannot see the whole. Only intuition, flowing from the deepest part of you, can. And so you learn to trust. Slowly, at first, tentatively. But each time you obey that inner whisper, life responds. Doors open. The path shifts. What once felt like coincidence now feels like confirmation. You begin to move not with force but with grace, no longer pushing against life but flowing with it. This is not about becoming special. It is about becoming present. When you live attuned to intuition, you stop searching desperately for signs. You become the kind of person who naturally receives them. You no longer force the path to appear. You allow it. You no longer demand control. You surrender to resonance. And in that surrender, something extraordinary happens. You begin to trust yourself in a way you never have before. Not the self built from masks and roles, but the self that has always been there, quiet, steady, waiting for you to listen. There is a turning point in every awakening when you stop fighting what you feel. For so long, you may have worn the armor of composure, convincing the world, and perhaps yourself, that you were untouched by pain. But awakening demands honesty. It asks you to finally drop the shield and let your emotions move through you, raw and unfiltered. This surrender is not weakness. It is one of the most courageous acts of the soul. Because to feel deeply, without resistance, is to step into the fire of transformation. Anger, sadness, loneliness, these are not enemies to be silenced. They are messengers carrying truths you once avoided. When you stop suppressing them, they no longer need to scream. They soften into clarity. Modern psychology echoes this ancient truth. Trauma, when unacknowledged, repeats itself. Buried emotions do not die. They fester. But when honored, when brought into awareness, they lose their destructive power. Therapists speak of shadow work, of integrating the parts of ourselves we once exiled. Somatic practices remind us that emotions are not abstract. They live in the body, waiting to be felt and released. This is what surrender gives you. Integration. Instead of splitting yourself into fragments, the part that moves forward and the part that remains wounded, you bring all of yourself home. You allow the sadness to wash over you, and it cleanses. You let anger rise, and instead of destroying, it reveals where your boundaries were crossed. You sit with loneliness, and instead of punishment, it becomes a temple where your own voice finally speaks. Great teachers across time recognized this. The Stoics taught that emotions, when examined rather than feared, could guide us to virtue. Buddhist monks sat with suffering until it revealed its impermanent nature. Even Jung warned that what we refuse to feel remains in the unconscious, shaping our lives without our knowing. To listen, therefore, is to liberate. And liberation does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in the moment you admit to yourself, "This is what I feel," and that is enough. In that moment, you stop betraying yourself. You stop demanding perfection or performance. You allow yourself to be human, aching, trembling, alive. What follows is not despair, but strength. A new kind of strength, softer yet firmer, no longer built on defense, but on integration. Because when you listen to what you feel, you are not just listening to pain, you are listening to your soul. And in that listening, healing begins. When the battle with your own soul ends, when you finally allow the shadows and the light to stand side by side, something extraordinary begins to take shape. Out of the ruins of collapse, out of the silence of surrender, a new self quietly emerges. This self is not built from fear or the need for approval or the desperate scramble for control. It is born from authenticity, from presence, from truth. The pain that once felt like punishment reveals itself as purification. It burned away the illusions. It stripped off the masks. It forced you to stop pretending and to start remembering. And what you are remembering is not something new. It is something eternal. It is the essence of you, the part that existed long before the roles, the traumas, the false identities. This is why many traditions speak of rebirth, the phoenix rising from the ashes, Persephone returning from the underworld, even the resurrection at the heart of Christianity. All these myths point to the same truth. Death is never the end. It is the passage through which life renews itself. So too with your awakening. What looked like breakdown was expansion. What felt like the end was only the threshold of a beginning. You no longer rush through life to avoid silence, because silence now speaks with clarity. You no longer tolerate what drains your spirit, because you know the cost of losing touch with your essence. You no longer chase validation, because peace itself has become your compass. And though others may not understand this new version of you, you do not need them to. The days of seeking approval are gone. You walk differently now, not with certainty, but with faith, not with fear, but with presence. Every step, even if small, is aligned with the rhythm of your soul. Carl Jung once said that the encounter with the self often begins with pain, because only through darkness do we learn to see the light. If you are walking through that darkness now, know this: you are not lost. You are awakening. The cracks in your life were never meant to destroy you. They were meant to let the light in. And from that light, the truest version of you is being born, steadier, deeper, more alive than ever before. This is not the end of your story. It is the return to yourself.